Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell adjusted her tactical gear one final time as the helicopter descended toward the Afghan mountainside. The rotor blades cut through the thin air, creating a deafening rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Below them, the rocky terrain stretched endlessly, hiding secrets and dangers that only the most elite warriors dared to face. Sarah had earned her place among the Navy SEALs through years of relentless training and unwavering determination. At 32, she was one of the few women to break through the barriers of this traditionally male-dominated force. Her piercing blue eyes and confident demeanor commanded respect from every member of her unit. Tonight's mission would prove to be unlike any other she had undertaken. The intelligence briefing earlier that evening had been straightforward. Their target was a high-value terrorist leader suspected of coordinating attacks against American forces throughout the region. The compound where he was believed to be hiding sat nestled in a valley surrounded by treacherous mountain passes. Sarah's team of 12 elite operators had trained for weeks to prepare for this moment. As the helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, Sarah's team moved with practiced precision. Each member knew their role without needing verbal communication. Hand signals and years of training guided their movements as they established a perimeter and began their approach toward the target compound. The night vision goggles cast everything in an eerie green glow, making the landscape appear otherworldly. The compound consisted of 3 main buildings connected by high walls and narrow corridors. Sarah divided her team into 3 groups, each responsible for clearing a different section of the complex. Her own group would take the central building where intelligence suggested their primary target would be located. The other teams would secure the perimeter and ensure no one escaped during the operation. Moving through the shadows, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes missions. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. The years of training had taught her to channel her energy and focus it completely on the task at hand. Her team members followed her lead, trusting in her judgment and experience to guide them safely through the operation. The first indication that something was wrong came when they reached the outer wall of the compound. The structure appeared abandoned, with no signs of recent activity or security measures that would typically protect a high-value target. Sarah motioned for her team to halt while she assessed the situation. Her instincts, honed through countless missions, told her that this felt too easy. Despite her concerns, the mission parameters were clear. They needed to investigate the compound and either capture or eliminate the target if present. Sarah made the decision to proceed, but with heightened caution. She adjusted their approach pattern and implemented additional security measures to protect her team from potential ambushes or traps. As they breached the outer wall and moved into the compound's courtyard, the silence was unsettling. No guards, no movement, no signs of life anywhere within the complex. Sarah's communication specialist tried to maintain contact with their command center, but the mountainous terrain was interfering with their radio signals. They were effectively operating in isolation until they could reach higher ground. The team methodically cleared each room of the first building, finding only empty spaces and abandoned equipment. Sarah began to suspect that their intelligence had been compromised or that their target had been warned of their approach. However, their orders required them to complete a thorough search of all 3 buildings before withdrawing from the area. Moving toward the central building where their primary target was expected to be hiding, Sarah noticed subtle signs that someone had recently been in the area. Footprints in the dust, disturbed furniture, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke suggested that the compound had been occupied within the past few hours. This gave her hope that their mission might still be successful. The central building proved to be more complex than the others, with multiple levels and a maze-like layout that could easily conceal hidden rooms or escape routes. Sarah's team split into smaller units to cover more ground efficiently while maintaining communication through hand signals and quiet whispers. The building's interior was dimly lit by moonlight filtering through small windows. On the second floor, Sarah discovered what appeared to be a communications room filled with radio equipment and maps of the surrounding region. The equipment was still warm, indicating that it had been in use very recently. This discovery suggested that their target might still be in the area, possibly hiding in one of the other buildings or attempting to escape through the mountain passes. As Sarah examined the communications equipment more closely, she found evidence of recent transmissions to locations throughout the region. The maps showed detailed markings of American patrol routes and base locations, confirming that this had indeed been an operational center for terrorist activities. The intelligence that led them to this location had been accurate, even if their timing was slightly off. While Sarah was analyzing the communications room, her team reported finding living quarters on the third floor that showed signs of recent occupation. Beds were unmade, personal belongings were scattered about, and meals appeared to have been abandoned mid-consumption. This evidence suggested that the occupants had left in a hurry, possibly warned of the approaching American forces. The search of the third building revealed a sophisticated weapons cache hidden beneath the main floor. The arsenal included advanced explosives, automatic weapons, and communication equipment that could be used to coordinate large-scale attacks against American and Allied forces. Sarah realized that they had stumbled upon something much larger than a simple hideout for a single terrorist leader. As her team documented the weapons cache and gathered intelligence materials, Sarah received an urgent message through her radio. Their extraction helicopter reported unusual activity in the surrounding mountains, with multiple heat signatures moving toward their location. It appeared that the compound's recent occupants had not fled the area, but were instead preparing to surround and attack the American forces. Sarah quickly assessed their tactical situation. Her team was in a vulnerable position inside the compound, with limited escape routes and unknown enemy forces approaching from multiple directions. The extraction helicopter could not safely land in the compound's courtyard while under potential attack, so they would need to fight their way to a more secure landing zone further up the mountain. Making rapid decisions based on her years of experience, Sarah ordered her team to gather the most critical intelligence materials and prepare for immediate withdrawal from the compound. They would need to move quickly and quietly to reach the extraction point before the enemy forces could completely surround their position. Every second counted in this type of situation. The team moved with practiced efficiency as they prepared to leave the compound. Sarah took point as they exited through a rear gate that offered the most direct route toward higher ground, where their extraction helicopter could safely pick them up. The night vision goggles revealed the challenging terrain they would need to navigate while potentially under enemy fire. As they began their ascent up the mountainside, Sarah could hear the distant sounds of vehicles and voices echoing through the valleys below. The enemy forces were definitely in pursuit, and they seemed to know the local terrain better than her team did. This would make their escape significantly more difficult and dangerous than originally planned. Halfway up the mountain, Sarah's communications specialist managed to establish contact with their extraction helicopter. The pilot reported that he could see muzzle flashes in the valley below, confirming that enemy forces were actively searching for the American team. The helicopter would need to approach from a different angle to avoid potential ground fire during the extraction. Sarah pushed her team harder as they climbed through the rocky terrain. Each member carried specialized equipment and intelligence materials that would be valuable to American forces, but the additional weight was slowing their progress. She had to balance the mission's intelligence objectives with the immediate need to keep her team alive and reach the extraction point safely. The sound of pursuit was growing closer as enemy forces began their own ascent up the mountain. Sarah could hear voices calling out in multiple languages and the occasional crack of rifle fire as the pursuers tried to locate the American team's position. Her team maintained radio silence except for essential communications to avoid giving away their exact location. As they approached the designated extraction point, Sarah's team encountered an unexpected obstacle. The landing zone was partially blocked by fallen rocks from a recent landslide, making it impossible for the helicopter to land safely in the designated area. They would need to find an alternative location or clear enough debris to create a suitable landing space. Sarah made the decision to split her team's efforts. Half would work to clear the landing zone, while the others established defensive positions to protect against the approaching enemy forces. The helicopter pilot confirmed that he could see their position and would attempt to land as soon as the landing zone was secure enough for a safe approach. Working frantically against time, Sarah's team moved rocks and debris while keeping watch for enemy forces climbing up the mountain below them. The physical exertion at high altitude was taking its toll, but their training and determination kept them focused on the task at hand. Every cleared obstacle brought them closer to a successful extraction. The enemy voices were now clearly audible as the pursuing forces closed the distance between them and the American team. Sarah estimated that they had perhaps 10 minutes before the enemy would reach their position. The landing zone was almost clear, but they still needed a few more minutes to ensure the helicopter could land safely without risk of damage to its landing gear. As the helicopter approached through the darkness, its distinctive sound echoed off the mountain walls. Sarah knew that this noise would also alert the enemy forces to their exact location, making the next few minutes critical to their survival. Her team quickly finished clearing the landing zone and took up defensive positions around the perimeter. The first enemy fighters appeared on the ridge below, just as the helicopter began its final approach to the landing zone. Sarah's team opened fire to suppress the enemy advance while maintaining their protective positions around the landing area. The sound of automatic weapons fire mixed with the roar of the helicopter's engines created a chaotic symphony of combat. Sarah was among the last to board the helicopter as her team provided covering fire for the extraction. As she ran toward the aircraft, she could see muzzle flashes getting closer as more enemy fighters reached their position. The helicopter pilot was eager to depart before his aircraft sustained damage from the increasing ground fire. Just as Sarah reached the helicopter's open door, she felt a sharp impact in her left shoulder. The force of the bullet spun her around and sent her falling toward the rocky ground beside the landing zone. Her team members immediately moved to help her, but she waved them toward the helicopter while trying to regain her footing despite the pain coursing through her arm. The helicopter pilot shouted that they needed to leave immediately as enemy fire was increasing in intensity and accuracy. Sarah's team hesitated, unwilling to abandon their commander, but she ordered them to board the aircraft and complete their extraction. Her training had taught her that the mission and her team's survival took priority over any individual, including herself. As the helicopter lifted off with her team safely aboard, Sarah found herself alone on the mountainside with enemy forces rapidly approaching her position. Her shoulder wound was bleeding heavily, and she knew that her chances of escaping on foot through unfamiliar terrain were minimal. The sound of the departing helicopter grew fainter as it disappeared into the night sky. With her good arm, Sarah managed to activate her emergency beacon, hoping that rescue forces would be able to locate her position before the enemy fighters reached her. However, she knew that any rescue attempt would be extremely dangerous given the number of hostile forces in the area. Her immediate priority was to find cover and tend to her wound while avoiding capture. Moving carefully through the rocky terrain, Sarah found a small cave partially hidden by fallen boulders. The space was cramped but would provide some protection from both the elements and enemy forces searching for her. She used her medical training to apply pressure to her wound and slow the bleeding, though she knew she would need professional medical attention soon. From her concealed position, Sarah could hear enemy voices and see flashlight beams moving across the mountainside as the search for her intensified. The fighters seemed to be conducting a systematic search of the area, checking every possible hiding place where an injured American soldier might take shelter. She knew it was only a matter of time before they found her location. As dawn approached, Sarah's situation became increasingly desperate. Her wound had stopped bleeding, but she was growing weak from blood loss and the effects of spending a cold night at high altitude. The enemy search parties were still active in the area, making any attempt to move toward friendly territory extremely risky. The sound of helicopters in the distance gave Sarah hope that rescue forces were attempting to locate her position. However, the heavy enemy presence in the area made any rescue attempt dangerous for both the rescue team and herself. She would need to find a way to signal her exact location without alerting the enemy forces to her presence. Using her knowledge of military signaling techniques, Sarah began preparing a signal that could be seen from the air, but would be difficult for ground forces to detect. She arranged reflective materials from her equipment to create a pattern that rescue helicopters would recognize as an American distress signal. The signal would only be visible from directly above her position. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, the enemy search parties showed no signs of giving up their hunt for the missing American soldier. Sarah could see that they had brought in additional personnel and were expanding their search pattern to cover a wider area of the mountainside. Her window of opportunity for rescue was rapidly closing. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, and Sarah prepared to activate her emergency beacon at the precise moment when rescue helicopters would be in the best position to detect her signal. She knew that once she activated the beacon, enemy forces would also be able to track her location, giving her only minutes to complete her extraction. As two American rescue helicopters appeared over the ridge, Sarah activated her beacon and displayed her emergency signal. The lead helicopter immediately changed course toward her position, while the second aircraft provided covering fire against enemy forces that had spotted the rescue attempt. The mountainside erupted in gunfire as both sides engaged in intense combat. The rescue helicopter descended rapidly towards Sarah's position, while its door gunners provided suppressive fire against the enemy forces advancing up the mountain. Sarah emerged from her hiding place and began moving toward the aircraft despite the pain in her wounded shoulder. Every step brought her closer to safety, but also made her a more visible target for enemy fire. Just as the rescue helicopter's crew chief reached out to pull Sarah aboard, Sarah pressed herself against the cold rock wall as enemy voices grew closer to her hiding spot. The failed rescue attempt had revealed her general location to the hostile forces, and they were now conducting a methodical search of every crevice and cave in the area. Her wounded shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still as boots scraped against rocks just meters from her concealment. The search continued for what felt like hours, with enemy fighters calling out to each other in various dialects as they coordinated their efforts. Sarah used her language training to understand fragments of their conversations, learning that they believed she was wounded and unable to travel far. They were right, but she had no intention of making their job easy. As the immediate search moved past her position, Sarah carefully assessed her situation. Her shoulder wound had stopped bleeding but was becoming increasingly stiff and painful. More concerning was her dwindling supply of water and the complete absence of food. The high altitude and cold mountain air were sapping her strength faster than she had anticipated. During a brief lull in the enemy patrol activity, Sarah managed to examine her emergency radio more thoroughly. The device had been damaged during her fall from the helicopter, with the antenna bent at an awkward angle and the battery compartment partially crushed. However, the unit still showed signs of life when she pressed the power button, giving her hope that she might be able to transmit a distress signal. Working carefully with her good hand, Sarah attempted to straighten the radio antenna and secure the loose battery connections. The delicate work required steady hands and complete concentration, made more difficult by the pain radiating from her wounded shoulder. Every small sound from her repairs seemed amplified in the quiet mountain air. After nearly an hour of careful work, Sarah managed to get a weak signal from the emergency radio. The transmission range would be limited by the damaged antenna and the mountainous terrain, but it might be enough to reach friendly forces if they were actively searching for her signal. She would need to time her transmissions carefully to avoid detection by enemy forces monitoring radio frequencies. The next challenge was finding a suitable location to transmit her distress signal. Her current hiding spot was too low on the mountainside to achieve good radio propagation, and the surrounding rock formations would block most of her signal. She would need to move to higher ground, despite the increased risk of detection by enemy patrols. Sarah waited until darkness fell before beginning her careful ascent toward a rocky outcropping she had spotted earlier in the day. The climb was treacherous with only one functioning arm, and she had to stop frequently to rest and listen for signs of enemy activity. Every loose rock that shifted under her weight seemed to echo through the mountain valley like a gunshot. The outcropping provided an excellent vantage point overlooking the valley below, where Sarah could see the lights from enemy vehicles and temporary camps that had been established during the search for her. The scale of the operation was impressive and intimidating. Clearly, her capture or elimination was considered a high priority by the hostile forces in the region. From her elevated position, Sarah activated her damaged radio and began transmitting a coded distress signal using protocols she had memorized during her training. The message included her approximate coordinates, current status, and details about the enemy forces in the area. She kept the transmission brief to minimize the chance of detection and triangulation by enemy radio operators. After completing her transmission, Sarah quickly moved away from the outcropping to a new hiding position further down the slope. Standard military doctrine assumed that any radio transmission could be detected and located within minutes, so staying mobile was essential for survival. The enemy would likely send patrols to investigate the transmission site very soon. Her assumption proved correct when she saw flashlight beams converging on the outcropping less than 20 minutes after her transmission. Enemy fighters climbed carefully toward the position, weapons ready, and moving with tactical precision. Sarah watched from her new hiding spot as they thoroughly searched the area where she had been broadcasting her distress signal. The search revealed no trace of Sarah's presence, but the enemy forces clearly knew that someone had been transmitting from that location. She could hear heated discussions among the fighters as they debated their next moves. Some wanted to expand the search pattern immediately, while others preferred to establish observation posts and wait for another transmission. Over the following days, Sarah developed a routine of moving to different locations each night and transmitting brief distress signals when conditions seemed favorable. She rationed her remaining water carefully and found occasional puddles of rainwater collected in rock depressions. Food became a serious concern as her body began to weaken from prolonged hunger and the stress of constant vigilance. The enemy's search pattern evolved as they adapted to Sarah's tactics. Instead of conducting large, noisy sweeps through the mountains, they established smaller, more persistent observation posts at key locations. These posts were staffed around the clock and equipped with radio monitoring equipment to detect and locate any future transmissions. Sarah realized that her survival strategy would need to change if she hoped to avoid capture and eventual rescue. The enemy forces were demonstrating impressive patience and sophistication in their search methods. They were clearly prepared to maintain their operation for weeks or even months if necessary to locate the missing American soldier. During her 6th night on the mountain, Sarah received an unexpected response to one of her distress transmissions. A weak voice speaking in clear English acknowledged her signal and provided coordinates for a potential extraction point several kilometers away. The voice belonged to someone claiming to be with a rescue team, but Sarah's training made her suspicious of the convenient timing and perfect English pronunciation. The possibility that enemy forces were attempting to lure her into a trap was high, but Sarah also recognized that legitimate rescue teams might finally be operating in the area. She would need to carefully evaluate any rescue attempt and be prepared to abort if the situation seemed suspicious. Her survival had depended on extreme caution, and she could not afford to make mistakes now. Sarah spent the next day observing the suggested extraction coordinates through improvised binoculars made from her rifle scope. The location was a relatively flat area surrounded by elevated positions that could easily conceal enemy fighters. However, it was also the type of landing zone that legitimate rescue helicopters would prefer for safety reasons. As evening approached, Sarah positioned herself at a safe distance from the extraction point, where she could observe any activity while maintaining multiple escape routes. Her wounded shoulder had become increasingly problematic, with signs of infection beginning to develop around the bullet wound. She knew that time was running out for her survival on the mountain. The sound of approaching helicopters reached Sarah's ears just after midnight, coming from the direction she would expect American aircraft to approach. However, she remained hidden and observed as 2 helicopters circled the extraction point and eventually landed. Figures emerged from the aircraft and began setting up what appeared to be a perimeter defense around the landing zone. Through her improvised binoculars, Sarah studied the figures moving around the helicopters. Their equipment and movement patterns appeared consistent with American Special Operations Forces, but she could not be completely certain from her distant observation point. The radio calls she could intercept sounded authentic, with proper military terminology and protocols. After nearly an hour of observation, Sarah made the difficult decision to attempt contact with the rescue team. She activated her emergency beacon and began moving carefully toward the extraction point while maintaining constant vigilance for signs that this might be an elaborate trap. Every step brought her closer to either salvation or capture. The rescue team responded immediately to her beacon signal, with several figures moving in her direction while others maintained security around the helicopters. Their movement patterns and hand signals appeared completely consistent with American military training, giving Sarah increasing confidence that this was a legitimate rescue operation. When she was within calling distance, Sarah used a challenge and response code that only American forces would know. The immediate and correct response from the approaching figures confirmed their identity and eliminated her remaining concerns about walking into a trap. Relief flooded through her as she realized that her ordeal on the mountain was finally ending. The rescue team medic immediately began treating Sarah's infected shoulder wound, while other team members prepared for rapid departure from the area. They reported that enemy forces were still actively searching the mountains, and the rescue helicopters had already taken small arms fire during their approach to the landing zone. As Sarah was helped aboard the rescue helicopter, she looked back at the mountainside where she had spent nearly a week evading capture. The experience had tested every aspect of her training and pushed her survival skills to their absolute limits. However, she was also aware that her ordeal was far from over. The helicopter flight to the nearest American base took 40 minutes through mountain passes and valleys where enemy forces were known to operate. Sarah received medical attention during the flight, but her wounded shoulder would require surgery to remove the bullet and treat the developing infection. The medic estimated several weeks of recovery time before she would be fit for duty. Upon arrival at the forward operating base, Sarah was immediately taken to the medical facility where military doctors began intensive treatment for her wounds and the effects of prolonged exposure to harsh mountain conditions. She had lost significant weight during her week-long ordeal and was severely dehydrated despite her careful rationing of available water sources. During her initial debriefing, Sarah provided detailed intelligence about enemy positions, capabilities, and search patterns she had observed during her time evading capture. This information proved valuable for planning future operations in the region and understanding enemy tactics and organization. Her experience had inadvertently provided insights that would benefit other American forces operating in similar environments. The medical evaluation revealed that Sarah's shoulder injury would require multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy to restore full function. The bullet had damaged muscle tissue and created complications that would take months to heal completely. Additionally, she had developed respiratory problems from the high altitude and cold conditions that would need ongoing treatment. Sarah's commanding officers were impressed by her survival skills and the intelligence she had gathered during her evasion, but they were also concerned about the severity of her injuries and their impact on her future military career. The extent of her shoulder damage might prevent her from passing the physical requirements necessary for continued service with the Navy SEALs. After 3 weeks of intensive medical treatment, Sarah was transferred to a larger military hospital in Germany where specialists could provide advanced care for her injuries. The journey marked the beginning of what would become a long and difficult recovery process, with no guarantee that she would ever return to active duty. The shoulder surgeries were only partially successful, with significant scarring and reduced range of motion remaining despite the skilled work of military surgeons. Physical therapy sessions were painful, and progress was slower than anyone had hoped. Sarah's determination and positive attitude helped, but the physical limitations were becoming increasingly apparent to everyone involved in her care. 6 months after her rescue from the Afghan mountains, Sarah received devastating news from her medical team. The combination of her shoulder injury, respiratory damage, and psychological effects from her extended survival ordeal meant that she would not be cleared for return to special operations duty. Her career as a Navy SEAL was effectively over. 3 years had passed since Sarah Mitchell officially died. The memorial service had been attended by her former teammates, family members, and military officials who believed they were honoring a fallen hero. The decision to declare her dead had not been made lightly. But when all rescue attempts failed and no trace of her could be found after months of searching, the military had little choice but to close her case file. The woman who now called herself Maria Santos bore little resemblance to the confident Navy SEAL who had once commanded elite warriors in the most dangerous regions of the world. Her blonde hair had been dyed black and cut short in a practical style that helped her blend into the population of the small Mexican border town where she had been living and recovering from her ordeal. The plastic surgery had been necessary, but painful, altering her facial features enough to make recognition by casual observers unlikely. Her piercing blue eyes, once her most distinctive feature, were now hidden behind brown contact lenses that she wore constantly. The transformation had been so complete that even her own reflection sometimes startled her when she glimpsed it unexpectedly in mirrors or windows. Sarah's actual rescue from the Afghan mountainside had been carried out by a covert unit operating without official sanction or oversight. The team had been composed of former Special Operations personnel who specialized in extracting high-value targets from hostile territory. Their methods were unorthodox, and their existence was denied by all government agencies. The extraction had occurred during her 8th night on the mountain, when hypothermia and infection from her untreated wounds had brought her close to death. The covert team had located her using advanced tracking technology that detected the faint electronic signature from her damaged emergency radio. By the time they found her, Sarah was barely conscious and suffering from severe dehydration and blood loss. Instead of returning her to official American custody, the covert team had transported Sarah to a private medical facility hidden in the mountains of Pakistan. The facility specialized in treating individuals who needed to disappear from official records while receiving advanced medical care. No questions were asked about patient backgrounds, and all treatment was conducted under assumed identities. The recovery process had taken nearly 18 months, during which Sarah underwent multiple surgeries to repair her shoulder damage and treat complications from her extended exposure to harsh mountain conditions. More challenging than the physical healing was the psychological trauma from her near-death experience, and the realization that she had been abandoned by the very organization she had served with unwavering loyalty. During her rehabilitation, Sarah learned that her official rescue mission had been called off after the damaged helicopter reported her as missing and presumed dead. No further attempts had been made to locate her, despite protocols that typically required extensive search operations for missing special operations personnel. The speed with which she had been written off suggested that political considerations had influenced the decision. The covert team that rescued her explained that they had been hired by a private organization that specialized in retrieving American personnel who had been abandoned by official channels. Their clients included wealthy families, private military contractors, and occasionally foreign governments who wanted to embarrass American leadership by exposing instances of abandoned soldiers. Sarah's case had attracted their attention because of her elite status and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the termination of her rescue operations. The organization believed that her abandonment was connected to the intelligence she had gathered during her mission, which may have revealed information that certain parties preferred to keep secret. As her physical recovery progressed, Sarah began to understand the complex political situation that had led to her abandonment. The terrorist compound her team had raided was apparently connected to individuals who had relationships with American intelligence agencies. Her discovery of this connection had made her a liability that needed to be eliminated quietly. The decision to declare her dead rather than continue rescue operations had solved multiple problems for those involved in the covert relationships. Sarah's elimination removed a witness to sensitive information, while her death could be attributed to enemy action rather than deliberate abandonment. The memorial service and posthumous honors had provided excellent cover for what was essentially a sanctioned assassination. Learning the truth about her abandonment had been more painful than any of her physical injuries. The organization she had served faithfully had betrayed her when it became convenient to do so. The teammates she had trusted with her life had been told that she was dead and that further rescue attempts would be futile. Even her family had been convinced that she had died heroically in service to her country. The psychological rehabilitation required to process this betrayal had taken longer than her physical recovery. Sarah had to rebuild her sense of identity without the military structure that had defined her existence for over a decade. The woman she became during this process was harder and more cynical than the idealistic officer who had once believed in absolute loyalty and honor. After completing her recovery, Sarah had been given a choice by her rescuers. She could attempt to return to official American custody and expose the truth about her abandonment, knowing that this would likely result in her mysterious death or permanent imprisonment on fabricated charges. Alternatively, she could accept a new identity and disappear permanently, allowing the official story of her death to remain unchallenged. The decision to accept the new identity had not been easy, but Sarah recognized that attempting to expose the truth would be futile and dangerous. The same people who had abandoned her in Afghanistan would not hesitate to eliminate her permanently if she threatened to reveal their activities. Her only realistic option was to start a new life under a different name in a location where she would be safe from retaliation. The small Mexican town where she had been living provided the anonymity and distance from her former life that Sarah needed to heal and plan her next moves. She had taken a job as a fitness instructor at a local gym, using modified versions of her military training to help ordinary people improve their physical condition. The work was satisfying, but hardly challenging for someone with her background and capabilities. During her 3 years of exile, Sarah had been carefully monitoring news about military operations and personnel changes within the special operations community. She had maintained contact with trusted individuals who could provide information about developments that might affect her situation. Most importantly, she had been gathering evidence about the people responsible for her abandonment. The breakthrough came when Sarah learned about a major scandal involving the same intelligence officials who had been connected to her original mission. Congressional investigations had exposed their involvement in illegal activities, and several high-ranking individuals had been arrested or forced to resign. The political landscape that had made her a liability was finally changing. More significantly, Sarah discovered that the current leadership of the Navy SEALs included several officers who had been her allies during her active service. These individuals had always questioned the official story of her death and had been quietly investigating the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. They represented an opportunity for her to safely return from the dead. The decision to reveal herself required careful planning and precise timing. Sarah needed to approach the right people under circumstances that would protect her from retaliation while allowing her to present evidence of the conspiracy that had led to her abandonment. She also needed to be prepared for the possibility that her return would not be welcomed by all parties. Sarah's first contact was made through an encrypted communication channel with Commander James Rodriguez, one of her former colleagues who now held a senior position within the SEAL command structure. Rodriguez had been one of the most vocal critics of the decision to terminate her rescue operations, and Sarah believed he could be trusted with the truth about her survival. The initial conversation was conducted through intermediaries who verified identities and established secure communication protocols. Rodriguez was understandably shocked to learn that Sarah was alive, but he quickly grasped the implications of her survival and the potential it created to expose the conspiracy that had abandoned her. He agreed to help facilitate her return under conditions that would ensure her safety. The plan that emerged from their discussions was complex and required coordination with multiple agencies and officials who had not been compromised by the original conspiracy. Sarah would need to provide detailed testimony about her experiences and present evidence about the individuals who had arranged her abandonment. In exchange, she would receive protection and the opportunity to resume her military career. The evidence Sarah had gathered during her exile was substantial and damning. She had documented connections between the terrorist compound her team had raided and American intelligence assets. She had proof that the decision to terminate her rescue was made for political rather than operational reasons. Most importantly, she had testimony from her covert rescuers who could verify the circumstances of her extraction and subsequent treatment. Preparing for her return required Sarah to overcome not just the practical challenges of resuming an identity that had been legally dead for 3 years, but also the emotional difficulty of reconnecting with a life and career that had been stolen from her. She would need to rebuild relationships with family members who had mourned her death and colleagues who had been told she was gone forever. The transformation back to her original identity was as challenging as the original change had been. The plastic surgery required to reverse her altered appearance was extensive and painful. Removing the brown contact lenses and Returning to her natural blonde hair color felt strange after years of seeing herself as a different person in every mirror. More difficult was the psychological preparation for returning to a world that had continued without her for 3 years. Her family had grieved her death and moved on with their lives. Her former teammates had processed their loss and formed new bonds with replacement personnel. Sarah would essentially be returning as a ghost to haunt people who had learned to live without her. The official process of resurrecting someone who had been declared dead required extensive legal and administrative work. Death certificates had to be voided, personnel records had to be corrected, and explanations had to be provided to numerous agencies and organizations that had processed her death benefits and memorial honors. Each step created opportunities for discovery by hostile parties. Sarah's return was scheduled to coincide with a major reorganization of the Special Operations Command structure. The timing would provide cover for personnel changes and allow her reappearance to be presented as part of a broader shakeup rather than an isolated incident that might attract unwanted attention from those who preferred her to remain dead. The moment of truth came on a cold morning in November when Sarah walked through the gates of the Naval Special Operations Command wearing her dress uniform for the first time in over 3 years. The medals and ribbons on her chest represented achievements from her previous life, but the woman wearing them had been transformed by experiences that no military decoration could adequately recognize. The initial meetings were awkward and emotional as former colleagues struggled to accept that someone they had mourned was suddenly standing before them alive and healthy. Sarah's appearance had changed enough during her exile that some people needed time to convince themselves that this was really the same person they had known and lost years earlier. The formal hearings where Sarah presented her evidence and testimony took place in secure facilities with participation limited to individuals with the highest security clearances. Her accounts of the conspiracy that led to her abandonment were detailed and supported by documentation that left little room for doubt about the truth of her claims. The political and legal consequences of Sarah's revelations extended far beyond the military, reaching into intelligence agencies and congressional oversight committees that had been unaware of the illegal activities surrounding her original mission. Several additional arrests were made, and existing investigations were expanded to include the charges related to her abandonment. For Sarah personally, the most important outcome was the official restoration of her military status and the opportunity to resume her career with the Navy SEALs. The medical evaluation showed that her physical condition had actually improved during her exile, as the civilian rehabilitation had been more comprehensive than what would have been available through military medical channels. The skills Sarah had developed during her 3 years of survival and exile had made her an even more capable operator than she had been before her apparent death. Her experience with covert operations, identity transformation, and intelligence gathering had provided training that could not be replicated in any formal military program. Within 6 months of her return, Sarah was promoted to the rank of commander and given leadership of a new special operations unit that specialized in recovering personnel who had been abandoned or betrayed by their own organizations. Her unique experience made her the ideal person to lead operations designed to prevent other soldiers from suffering the fate she had endured. The irony was not lost on Sarah that her abandonment and presumed death had ultimately led to her commanding an even more elite and important unit than she had led before her exile. The betrayal that was intended to destroy her had instead forged her into a more capable and determined leader than she had ever been previously. Her first major operation as commander involved rescuing a team of American contractors who had been abandoned in Somalia after their mission was compromised by intelligence leaks. Using tactics she had learned during her own survival and extraction, Sarah successfully retrieved the entire team and brought them home safely. The success of that mission and others that followed established Sarah's reputation as the premier expert in recovering abandoned American personnel. Her unit became the go-to resource whenever official channels failed or when political considerations prevented normal rescue operations from being conducted. Sarah Mitchell had returned from the dead not just as the same person who had been abandoned in Afghanistan, but as someone transformed by her ordeal into an even more formidable warrior and leader. Her apparent death had been the making of her greatest achievements, and her return had given her the opportunity to ensure that no other American soldier would suffer the abandonment she had endured. The woman who had once been declared killed in action now commanded the most elite rescue unit in the American military, using her unique experience to bring other forgotten warriors home from the places where their own government had left them to die. In the end, her betrayal had become her greatest strength, and her resurrection had made her more powerful than her enemies had ever imagined possible. The medical discharge process was lengthy and emotionally difficult for Sarah, who had dedicated her entire adult life to military service. The identity and purpose she had built around her role as an elite warrior were suddenly being stripped away, leaving her to face an uncertain future outside the military structure that had defined her existence. During her final weeks of military service, Sarah was assigned to administrative duties that accommodated her physical limitations while she completed the discharge process. These mundane tasks felt meaningless compared to the high-stakes missions she had previously undertaken, reinforcing her sense that her meaningful career was ending prematurely due to circumstances beyond her control. The official notification of her discharge came with expressions of gratitude for her service and sacrifice, along with promises of continued medical support and assistance transitioning to civilian life. However, these formal acknowledgments could not address the profound sense of loss Sarah felt as she prepared to leave the only career she had ever wanted to pursue. Sarah's final day of active duty was marked by a small ceremony attended by her former teammates and commanding officers. The presentation of commendations and medals for her service felt bittersweet, representing both recognition of her achievements and the end of her military career. As she walked away from the base for the final time, Sarah carried with her the official designation that would follow her into civilian life: medically retired due to injuries sustained in combat operations. The aircraft, a massive explosion, shook the mountainside. An enemy rocket-propelled grenade had struck the rock face near the helicopter, sending debris flying in all directions. The aircraft was knocked off course by the blast, and Sarah found herself falling back toward the rocky ground. The helicopter pilot struggled to regain control of his damaged aircraft, while enemy fire continued to pour down from multiple positions on the mountainside. The crew chief and door gunners worked desperately to stabilize the helicopter and create another opportunity to rescue Sarah from her increasingly dangerous position on the exposed slope. Sarah watched helplessly as her rescue helicopter fought to stay airborne despite the damage it had sustained from the enemy attack. She could see smoke trailing from the aircraft's engine compartment, and the pilot's struggles to maintain altitude were becoming more pronounced with each passing second. The reality of her situation was becoming clear. This rescue attempt was failing. The damaged helicopter made one final attempt to reach Sarah's position, but another enemy rocket forced it to retreat to avoid complete destruction. The aircraft disappeared over the ridge, leaving Sarah alone once again on the mountainside with enemy forces closing in from multiple directions. Her chance for immediate rescue had been lost,